Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to Stormworks, and we are back, not in the workbench, working on our DSB. And yeah, as you guys can see, we've got the azimuth thrusters in, and the props are turning, so the engine is running. And that's going to be basically the main focus of today's episode. So if you guys are newer to Stormworks and you want to learn a little bit about the modular engines, this is going to be a great episode. We're going to take it slow. We are going to kind of just get the main engine hooked up. So if you want to learn about the larger marine modular engines, this is probably a good episode for you. If you're not new to the game, I'm going to apologize. It's probably going to be a little bit more boring for you. But yeah, I did want to make a video where it's a little bit more guided on how to make these modular engines. And before we get into it, as you guys can see, I'm going to use the ZE controller. Nothing too crazy with those settings. I always change it to AFR instead of stoic. And then if with these larger engines, you can play with the AFR values a little bit. I wouldn't recommend you doing that. And when I say a little bit, I wouldn't go past 14.2 and I wouldn't go below 13.7. We're not going to get into that side of things, but anyways, enough of that. We're going to get right into the build with this one, guys. Like I said, the goal for this episode is really going to be just to get the engines hooked up. Well, just the main engine. And again, I want to take it a little slower, but I really want to do that just so you guys can learn a little bit more about the modular engines if you are newer to the game. So we are going to get right into it. You guys can see this is kind of later when we get it all hooked up. Don't worry about all of that weird plumbing on the wall. I'm going to delete that. So you did not see that. But anyways, we're going to get right into it, and we're going to start with the exhaust. So we're going to start that now. So in this case, we're going to give each one of the cylinders its own, when I say exhaust run, give it its own set of pipes. Do not combine the pipes. Give it its own entire set of pipes. And then I'm going to also pump out with a large pump on all of them, which I know a lot of you are going to, pump efficiency, like yada, yada, yada. Yeah, I know. Anyways, I like the electric pumps. The mechanical pumps are annoying. They consume way too much electric. Anyways, going back to talking about the engine thing, you can see I did put a bulkhead wall in, like I said I was going to in the last episode. So there is a wall in the back of this engine room. I'm going to go ahead and get a manifold kind of running down. Now, I know you don't need to connect these in the sense that I'm going to, but I like to do this because it basically spaces the manifold ports out, and it gives you a little bit more space. So we've got the exhaust hooked up, and the next thing that I'm going to really worry about here is fuel. The fuel, if you really think about it, guys, the air-fuel ratio, you want to be around somewhere around 14. So air-to-fuel ratio, air first to fuel. So 14 to 1. So you need a lot more air than fuel. So I recommend a air manifold or an exhaust out on every cylinder. You only need one fuel in, and you're going to need an air in on every single cylinder. So I like to think of these engines as just big air pumps, and I would recommend you think of them the same way too. You're going to get more power out of an engine with the more air that you can get into it. The more air that you can get into it, the more fuel you can put into it. The more fuel you put into it, the more power you make. So really, they're just big air pumps. And because you want an air-to-fuel ratio of around 14 to 1, that means you don't really need to put as much fuel into the engine as you need to put air. So in this case, one fuel manifold should be fine. I'm just going to use one pipe with an inline electric pump. Going back to the whole pump thing, yeah, I know the inline electric pumps are not the best. I'm going to keep it. It's easy. It's simple. They're inline. That's what they're for. So that should be plenty enough fuel for us. And yeah, actually, we might switch the pump, but I do want to maybe play around with different layouts as far as where the fuel line is going to come in. I don't want it to be completely under the floor, but we might put it under the floor. But anyways, enough of that. Going back to the whole engine thing. So we've got really, once we get this fuel line in, we'll have two things hooked up. But the first two things that we hooked up are going to be the exhaust and then the fuel. And so that means next we're going to need to do the air and the coolant. And you guys can see I have an electric motor down there. That's just for starting the engine. If you don't know how to do that, you just have to put a clutch on the end of the cylinder, throttle it up with an electric motor to get the large engines kick-started. Obviously, you can use the belts and the crankshaft belts, but I don't really like them, especially on an engine this size. Guys, you're not starting an engine this size with belt starters. Definitely not. Anyways, So we've got the fuel in, and we've got our exhaust sort of in. We're going to have to obviously do the full length of that. But the other thing that I'm going to do next now is the air. And usually, and you guys don't have to do this. This isn't, I'm not trying to make this a tutorial. It's just, I pretty good with the marine engines, not the car engines. Kind of suck at the car engines personally, but the marine engines, I know what I'm doing. And so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to get those 3 separate air manifolds in. And that's kind of what I was rambling on about. I'm going to just pick a nice color, and I like to run these right next to the exhaust. It kind of doesn't make too much sense to put it. I mean, it really doesn't matter where they are, but in this case, I'm doing it more for the visual standpoint. And also, generally speaking, you're going to have a large plenum right above the top of the engine, and that's going to be for your exhaust and your air and that kind of stuff. So I like to put these on the same size so we can kind of mount them the same, and then they'll go up into separate plenums. So one will be for the exhaust, one will be for the intake. So that's why I'm doing it on this case. Again, we're going with the large pumps. It's very, very important that if you guys are really, really trying to get more power out of these engines, that you're pumping air in and you're pumping exhaust out. And I know the pumping exhaust out doesn't sound as important, but again, these are just giant air pumps. So if you have to basically pull as much air out of the engine as you're pushing into the engine. Well, it's actually backwards. You're pulling air into the engine. You have to push air out. So if you're not pushing all of that air out, you're just bottlenecking your engine on the exhaust. And if you're not pulling all of that air in, you're bottlenecking the engine on the intake. So it's a lot more important that you, first of all, if you're really trying to make things simple on yourself, I would use the same pumps for the air in and the exhaust out. And I would use the same amount of manifolds and exhaust ports. Now, this isn't from an ECU standpoint. That's going to make things obviously a lot trickier on you. I use the ZE ECU on the workshop. I recommend everybody do that because it's really, really good. Now, I know I said do not combine basically the pipes. In this case, I'm going to combine these just because it's a smaller engine. Larger engines, I would recommend you do not combine more than 3 exhaust pipes. Or intake pipes, or really any of the pipes. And obviously you can play games. I know you can do RPS and fluids and all that kind of stuff in the same pipes. I don't do all of that. I don't do any of that. There's no need to on a boat this size, on an engine this size. So just keep that in mind. If you're going to do larger, if you're going to do 4 cylinders or anything above, that's when I recommend really you try to not get too many junctions into those pipes. If you don't know, you can throttle the amount of fluid in the pipes, and the T's. Also, if you have enough T's in a pipeline, it can sometimes cause the game to bug out a little. So try to avoid that if you can. Obviously, it's not perfect all the time. I'm not even doing it in this, but that is just something to kind of keep in mind. So next on the to-do list here is going to be basically the exhaust. So I'm going to do some weird things with the exhaust. I'm not going to talk about them quite yet, but just know, they're going to have these weird little heat exchangers. We're going to use that as auxiliary heat for the ship, but not going to get into that quite yet. We are going to get the rest of the exhaust hooked up, and then we've also got to do the rest of the intake run. So hit you with a quick time lapse. We're going to get all those blocks placed, and then we'll come back and we'll finish getting this engine hooked up. we did a good long run of plumbing. But anyways, that needed to get done, and I recommend to all of you when you're building boats to make sure your exhaust goes out the top and not out the bottom. You can put it out the bottom, but it's kind of silly, and I've done it before. But more importantly, make sure your air comes out on the top. And yeah, that is the much more important of the two issues. So just keep that in mind. And yeah, pretty much we're just going to play with the generator now. So I know in the last episode I said we were going to kind of mess with the spacing on the drive shaft because it's going to have to move around. So yeah, we're going to mess with the spacing on the drive shaft because it has to move around. So I did say we were going to add a crane, and I know I keep messing around with this, but I'm just trying to make sure the blocks are where they need to be first, and then we can worry about a crane. And this looks, yeah, I would say that looks about right. So our ship is still slowly flooding because of the seals. We'll fix that. The ship is not going to sink when it's done. I hope. You guys might make it sink, but it shouldn't sink when you spawn it. And if you missed the last episode, it's only doing that because I used the turret rings for the door seals, which is a silly idea, but it is fun. And to be honest, it's a little bit more realistic. They do leak in real life, and they do have these big hatches that cover them because they leak in real life. But anyways, enough of that. Yeah, so we got the large engine hooked up, and I'm not really going to change too much more with it. Obviously, we've got to do the cooling loops, and the cooling in itself can be basically its own entire episode. So if you guys want me to kind of slow down and talk about the cooling and how you do that on large engines, let me know. Especially, I will say all of my engines, at least the marine ones, are designed to basically run at full throttle indefinitely, which makes cooling a nightmare. So really, it is one of the more frustrating parts of this game to learn and understand. But if you guys want me to slow down with that too, we can do that. The big thing really with the cooling your engine thing is basically just flow rates. A lot of it comes down to flow rates. You just want good flow rates, and you need to know where the flow rates need to be good and where the flow rates can be a little bit lower. But for now, I'm kind of just adding like this little, I don't know, like this floor around the engine. Obviously, you want the engine as low as possible so you can lower your center of gravity, which means we put it right on the bottom of the hull, which to be fair, a lot of boats are going to do that. And because of that, I do want to have kind of a raised floor around it. It is a pretty large engine. You don't really need the access to the lower crankcase. And if you do, well, that's probably a bigger issue. So I would rather have there be like this nice little walkway around the engine so you can kind of access the upper end of the engine a lot easier, because generally that's going to be the side of the engine that's going to need a lot more maintenance and a lot more inspection, that kind of thing. So we are going to get this fake little floor in. I know we're not really talking about engines anymore, but we had our fun with the engines earlier, and I just wanted to pretty this up before we close the episode out. Now, before I do that, I will say the weird little heat exchangers on the exhaust, I said that we're going to be bleeding heat off of those for the ship. We'll do that in another episode as well. The HVAC on the ship is going to be probably pretty extensive just because it's going to be designed for the Arctic. But yeah, guys, that's pretty much all I got for you guys in this episode. I know it was a little bit of a shorter one, a little bit of a slower one as well, but yeah, a little change of pace isn't too bad. So we got the engines hooked up, and in the next episode, we will hopefully get on with doing the generator and some of the other mechanical parts of the ship. And then obviously, I mean, once the engine's in, really the rest of it's just figuring out the systems and then filling out the spaces. But that takes a lot of time, and we've got a lot of things to figure out. And I'm not going to do all of that on camera. I will go over a lot of it when it's done, but you guys don't need to see me do art and Lewis screens and all that kind of stuff. But anyways, this is all I have for you guys in this one. If you made it to the end, thank you so much. I really appreciate the support. If you like this series, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. If you guys are new around here, there's also a link down below to our Discord. It's a good place to kind of meet people, hang out. That's also where we host some of the Stormworks building challenges. There will be one for this ship. It's just going to be down the road a little bit. But anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.